Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center Technologies. Today's discussion will be part one of a series of sessions talking about compliance settings in Configuration Manager 2012. So Configuration Manager 2012, compliance settings, here's where we're going to go. Basically, what are compliance settings, making use of those compliance settings, some of the components of compliance settings, how we get started, some suggestions on getting started, seeing the results of compliance settings, and this is an intro session. So we're going to just cover the basics, how to set this up. We'll dig deeper as we go through future sessions. So the next time we get together, the topic will be walking through all of the different things that you can look for in compliance settings. So the drop-down list, the registry, WMI, WQL, just to jump ahead a little bit, I'll walk through how to configure each one of those to detect what they're designed to work on, scripts, so on. And then from there, we'll kind of dig deeply on the server side, client side, how compliance settings actually get staged, how it works, how it's evaluated, and so on. Right. So at least 3 parts, and we'll see where we go from there. So let's get started today, though. So what are compliance settings in Configuration Manager 2012? So really, this is just an evolution of what we had in DCM, Desired Configuration Management, in Configuration Manager 2007. A lot more things that we can do, certainly, than in DCM, but it's just the natural next step for that. Just rebranded too. So instead of DCM, Desired Configuration Management, it's compliance settings, right? Which will include even more things than we had again in DCM. So specifically, compliance settings is built to allow you to manage and assess the configuration and compliance of systems. Well, what does it mean of systems? So this works against all servers, supported versions of servers, laptops, desktops, even mobile devices, Mac OS, right? So a wide range of things that we might want to detect compliance against, we can do with compliance settings in 2012. Another thing that's new for compliance settings in 2012 is the ability to auto-remediate things that we find out of compliance. So if you know, as an example, that a particular setting you're checking needs to be configured a certain way in every case, and you find that it's not, then it's really easy to tell the system, just fix that, right? Well, not without worry. Now, some folks don't want to do that because of change control windows and that kind of thing, so we certainly don't enforce that upon you, but it's an option should you wish to take advantage of it. So there's a number of ways that we can actually detect compliance conditions, as mentioned. Auto-remediation does not work with all of them. Auto-remediation really only works with those things that are found to be in the registry, WMI, right? Really, whenever the operator for that comparison is an equals, then we can auto-remediate that pretty well. If there's a scenario that you want to auto-remediate when it's detected to be out of compliance and it's more advanced, then you can certainly use a script and build the logic into that script to not only detect the problem, but to fix it on the fly as well. So how do we make use of this thing called compliance settings? So there's 3 big buckets that I kind of put there. It's my buckets, not official. But there's individual settings. So individual settings would be those things that might be a quick and dirty way, something that you want to check a particular item on a machine to see if it actually is in compliance. So as an example, maybe there's a file that you want to check to see if it's on a system, and then if it is, check to see certain attributes like maybe permissions or something of that nature on the file, maybe file version or whatever it is, right? You can certainly do that with compliance settings. And actually, that's a little tangent place I want to go for a minute. So very often, whenever a particular task is at hand and a particular bit of information is needed, it's really easy to go to those things that are familiar. Right? So as an example, if you just want to detect whether a file is present or not, and maybe some information about attributes and things like that, file version, We have other features in ConfigMgr that will do that. Software inventory will absolutely do that. But you have a whole lot more that you bring with software inventory than you bring with compliance settings. Meaning, if all you care about is testing the existence of a particular file, you know what that file is, you know what you want to get off of that file, then certainly software inventory can do it, but it's way overkill because of just the load on the system, the potential to bloat the database, and so on. Compliance settings is a lot more streamlined, a lot more flexible, easy to configure, very pointed, very focused in what it actually looks for. So if you have a need like that, and I'll give you a couple more examples in a minute, really think about what are the features in ConfigMgr that allow you to achieve that goal, and see if using software inventory as an example might be the best approach, or something like compliance settings. Other examples that kind of play here. So if you are wanting to quickly check and evaluate security on structure on a system, maybe the Windows folder or whatever it is, then compliance settings really good for that, right? If you want to determine whether a particular hardware device is present and configured, then compliance settings can absolutely do that. So think about what we get in hardware inventory. One of the things that might be an item that you check in an organization would be whether certain users have permissions to certain systems, or whether maybe more users than you intend have permissions to a given system. You could check those kind of things with hardware inventory. It would take, extending hardware inventory, getting some of the user configuration off the system. It would be a lot of work on the part of the system to grab that, submit it, store it in the database, so on. Maybe you need to do that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you could do a very focused, targeted compliance setting, which can tell you the same thing. It's a lot more friendly to the system. The data that it stores is a lot smaller, and it gives you the flexibility of scheduling. And I could go on and on with these kind of things, right? So the point of this is not to dissuade you from using hardware inventory, not to dissuade you from using software inventory, but to invite you to really evaluate whether that's the best option for you versus something like compliance settings, because very often compliance settings may be actually the better choice, right? So that's item number one, individual settings. What about number two? So group of settings. So this would be a scenario where you have a group of items that you want to evaluate together to help describe whether a system is in compliance or not in compliance. So I'll jump ahead a little bit. I'll show you this in a minute. So there's a set of settings that we provide as an example of what it means for certain operating systems, certain applications to be configured optimally. And if any of those settings are out of whack, then the item that we're checking doesn't comply with best practices. So for example, an operating system. If you want to look at a file server security, then there's a number of things that you might want to look at to determine, yes, this server is secure, or it's not. You do those collectively, because the point of the evaluation is to look at the total server for compliance with security requirements or security best practices. So there's a number of settings you would look at as a whole and evaluate them as a whole. So when I show you the example in a minute, you'll see there's, 20, 30 settings that make up that kind of evaluation. If any one of them is non-compliant, then the entire series is viewed as non-compliant, because since you've defined these settings, any one of them can cause the system to be vulnerable and therefore marked non-compliant. Right? You'll see it makes sense more in a minute when I show it to you. The last item here, range of settings. So this is really, I have an asterisk by it. This is really a different way to think of using compliance settings. So whenever you use compliance settings, the general expectation is that you're either going to be compliant or you're going to be non-compliant, and the result will indicate that, right? And if it's non-compliant, it tends to flag an issue, and you want to make sure and remediate that. That's fine, and that is the way the component was designed to be used. However, there can be some interesting, inventive ways that you might want to use this, right? So I'll give you an example that specifically came out of Configuration Manager 2007, and specifically System Center Endpoint Protection when we integrated that. So if you look at how SCEP works in Configuration Manager 2007, it's really driven by a lot of compliance settings. One of those compliance settings is simply a way to look up on the system when the last time the virus signatures were updated and report that back. So in that case, we have a single configuration item, again, you'll see that in a minute, that has 4 checks on it, as I recall. I think it has 4, might have 5 checks. First check is that the antivirus signatures were updated within the past 24 hours. The second would be that the antivirus signatures were updated between 1 and 3 days ago, third between 3 and 7 days ago, and the fourth over 7 days ago. Again, compliance settings, the way we think of it, we expect all of the checks on a different configuration item to pass in order for a system to be compliant. If you are using something like this, there's no way all 4 of these will pass, right? There's no way that a system can have the virus signatures updated within 24 hours and also have them updated within 3 to 7 days ago. It just doesn't work that way, right? So this is a different way of using compliance settings that could get you some really interesting information, help you put the detail into a range of values, right? The trade-off is that you always will expect that configuration item series, ultimately the configuration baseline, will be non-compliant. It will always report as non-compliant, because really what you're using this to do is not check compliance. You're using it to check how a system is configured within a range of possible values, right? So you could argue, that maybe having virus signatures that are greater than 7 days old is considered non-compliance in your organization. That's great. But even those that are less than 24 hours will be flagged as non-compliance. The point is you need to be able to look at the report and find, realize, oh, these that are greater than 7 days, those are the ones that we really care about. These other ones, that's just information that, we're gathering because of the way we're doing it, right? Hope that makes sense. It's a really cool way to think about doing some things and collecting certain kinds of data. Again, the trade-off is that you'll have to put in the description that this particular collection would always be expected to be non-compliant. If you're okay with that, then certainly something to investigate. So what are the components of compliance settings? So really 2, right? There's the configuration item itself, which by itself really does nothing, right? It's kind of like a boundary. A boundary in 2012 by itself doesn't do anything. The boundary is not effective until it's added to a boundary group. Same thing here. A configuration item by itself, you can define it, build it, structure it all day until you add it into a configuration baseline. It's not effective. It's not evaluated. It's just part of the library, right? So I kind of think of configuration items, rough analogy, as being like books on a library shelf. The books could be fiction, they could be nonfiction, could be history, could be politics, could be science fiction, could be whatever, right? Could be medical journals, encyclopedias, all different kinds of books. They contain different kinds of information, but they're all books. Same way, configuration items are all configuration items. They can describe, and likely will describe, different things that you want to check, and taken collectively, you're going to have a library of configuration items that you might tap into for a given need. I like to think about building configuration items where possible in a modular way so they can be reused. Could be that there's a particular setting that you need to evaluate in multiple scenarios. Why build it multiple times? Why not build it one time on a single configuration item, and then if you need to include it on a baseline, you just add it in, right? You'll see how to do that in a minute. The baseline then is the vehicle that the configuration items sit on top of that allow you to evaluate. So the configuration baseline is what is deployed. And then our analogy, it's kind of like the configuration item is the bookshelf that the books sit on, right? So easiest way is to show it to you. I'll do that in a minute. But one other thing I'll just point out here. So the term configuration item in Configuration Manager means a lot of different things. Here in this discussion, compliance settings, a configuration item is exactly as I've described it. It is a certain setting configuration that you want to evaluate. But configuration items defined generically apply to compliance settings, apply to application model, apply to software updates and operating system deployment, and so on, right? So you'll see configuration items generically mean all of those things. So in this specific scenario, just know that a configuration item is this unit of defined definition of what we're going to check, right? All right. So let me move in to show you this thing, and hopefully it will make a little bit more sense. So let's go into the lab and actually show what this looks like. So I'm going to pull in 2 labs today. Oops. Helps if I'm focused on the password box. Okay, so this is my lab where I've got a few things set up. So this is compliance settings, and here's configuration items underneath compliance settings, and also configuration baselines. So you see that I've done a couple of examples. I just did this one. In fact, I'll get rid of it and go through it again. So I have 3 different ones here that I will use for demo. Actually, I'll use these 2 for demo. I'll create another one. Oh, there we go. All right. So let's go through the process. So we're going to create our configuration baseline. I'll call it test again, or test. And notice that there's 3 different targets that we can have for our baseline. It could be a Windows system, could be a mobile device, Android, iOS, Windows Phone, even a Windows PC running through mobile device management perhaps. Mac OS we can target, right? No problem. So we define what we want. I'll stay with Windows. We target the platform that we want this configuration item to run against. So I tend to filter that through collections. You could filter it here. You could filter it both ways. Really the choice up to you. Whatever you choose here, move on. And then we get to the real meat of this. We first have to define our setting that we want to check, and then the rule for how to check it, right? So if I do new here, you're going to see that I'm going to pop up a window where I actually have both tabs. I have the setting, which is where I'm with general, and compliance rules, which is over here. So the point is we'll actually do both and then skip ahead to summary in the wizard once we complete all this. Right, so I'll just call this test. And the setting type, you'll see all the different setting types that we have. So very much one that you'll see commonly used is registry. Probably the next in line is file system, right? But all of these things can be used. There's really, I can't imagine what you would need to find on a system that one of these predefined options can't find for you. But there could be some things that don't fit here, or some really more complex evaluations that you need to do, which is why we give you the option to use a script. So here, just as an example, I'll use file system, right? So we can choose either file or folder, okay? And then so I'll tell it where the file is, and I don't even have to really use the right name. It won't check it until I put it out there, so I'll just call bogus.txt, right? And then I'll set up the compliance rule. So this is what to check for, then the rule for how to check it. So I'm going to add a rule, so I'll call it test rule. And then this is the particular setting that I'm going to evaluate with this rule. And I can either tell it I want the value to be a certain thing. I can choose all of these values: date created, product name, sh1 hash, attribute, permissions. So I can, let me choose attributes for a minute. So I can use all of these, check to see whether the attributes are what I expect them to be. I can choose permissions. And here I would have to add a user. So in my case, and then from there I can filter out the permissions, make sure that user has the permissions to the file that I want them to have, and so on, right? So I complete this, and now I have this compliance rule. Well, notice this. So I have still this one setting. It's one setting that I'm telling where to look. In order for your compliance rule to pass, you might need more than one evaluation for that rule. So it could be that I need to validate the permissions of this file, but in addition to the permissions, I need to validate that that the file has certain attributes. I can do that together, no problem, and then it's kind of an anding situation. In order for this to be compliant, both of these items have to pass, right? And I can also go a different path. I can remove both of these, and instead of trying to find attributes on the file or specific characteristics of the file, I can just tell the system to tell me, does the file exist? It must exist on devices, must not exist on devices, whatever I want. Right here, the system will look and tell me whether I'm in compliance or not, right? So then I'm done with this. I've got my compliance setting defined. I've got my compliance rule defined. I can go ahead and click Next, and it will save it, and I'll have that one defined, right? So that's a file system one. Could be very, very useful. Again, think of that compared to software inventory, how targeted you could be, how precise and focused, how much less weight that could have on a system. Well, then I have an example here of detecting a registry key. So I can go into it, just show you the properties that's predefined already. All right, so if I go to Settings, I have it checking two things. I'll actually show you the results of this in a minute. So I'm detecting the software key. I'm also detecting the ABC key. This one I know exists. It should exist on all systems. So I just double-clicked it. We're going to tell it, check the registry key. I've already defined this, so I can't change it. I would have to delete it and recreate it if I made a mistake. Under local machine, I'm going to look for key name software, right? Inside that key, I'm just going to check, does it exist, right? Has to exist in order for this to pass. Well, similarly, I have this rule on the system, same exact thing. Under local machine, I need to have a key named ABC, and the compliance rule must exist, which it will not on my system. Okay? So pretty easy, pretty straightforward to detect a registry key. Here is just a real quick example of XML, right? So if you go on the web and try to find an example of configuring an XML like this, it's going to be hard to find. I couldn't find one after searching for a while, just checking, right? Pretty easy though. If you want to look inside an XML, if you understand the structure of the XML, all you do is path it down, tell it where the file is, first of all, and then path it down to the specific XML area that you want, specifically, in this case, the data server address tag, right? And then for the compliance rules, we can go through and tell it we must have this data center address tag set to equal this server name, right? And pretty easy. We go out and evaluate that, look inside the XML, and we're going to return the result. So as I mentioned, none of these actually do anything until you deploy them, tie them to a baseline, right? They're just definitions until then. So I have a baseline here, and I've already built this one. So let me just, before I go into that one, show you creating a baseline. So I'll call this test again. And when you create your baseline, you have three options. You have the option to add configuration items. So all of the configuration items in your library, you can choose from and add to this particular baseline. Or you can choose to add software updates. So if you want to have another mechanism, some people do, to validate software updates that are in the environment, you could certainly build a compliance setting to do that. Now, know that the compliance setting engine and the software updates engine are exactly the same. They do the same work. They report the same type of values, right? But if you wanted an extra check, you can certainly build that in. Just be very careful. Don't put in thousands of updates. Your result will not be as you like, but certainly possible. You can also include other configuration baselines. So if you have certain baselines that look for certain items, and for a particular test, maybe it makes sense to have all 3 of those baselines brought into a single baseline to evaluate them as a whole. You can do that, no problem, right? So it kind of follows the mentality of chunking out how you define certain checks, and then you can bring them up together at a higher level, almost like we do programming, functions and different things, right? But you're left to do that where it makes sense on your own. Okay, and then once we have this done, we can deploy it. So you'll see that I've actually deployed this to a collection. I actually deployed it to all systems. You may or may not want to do that. So normally I would say don't do that. It's not good to deploy anything to all systems. It actually might be useful to do that for a compliance setting. If it's something that's important to have across your entire environment, then certainly you can deploy it to all systems. Every system will get it and go forward. The one argument against deploying to all systems always is that you might very well have systems that are not active in all systems, and so your compliance rate will be degraded because of that. But certainly you can do it if you want to. All right, so here I've got this deployed, and we'll look at the results of that in just a minute. So before I totally leave this and I move to the next section and come back later, I do want to show you the remediation part. So if I go back to configuration items, I'll just use one of these that I've already got, go modify it. So I'm going to add another setting. So as an example, both of these are actually checking for the existence of this registry key. The rules are looking for it so I can edit it, right? I have no choice for remediation because I can't remediate whether a key exists or not. I mean, I suppose that code could put it back there, but that's kind of an odd thing to think about. What I can definitely remediate though is whenever a value is out of whack. So I'll just call this test value. I'm going to tell it to look for the registry value. I'm going to call it a string and tell it it's going to be under software. The value name is going to be test, right? And then when I go to compliance rules, now I have the option to remediate non-compliant rules where supported. So this will show up really in all of the places, as I'm thinking about right now, where we have a value, right? It won't work on all of them. Registry and WMI is where it works, but it will show up. So that's what it means when supported. So I could tell it, go ahead and the value must equal true. And so if it equals false, it'll go ahead and remediate it for this run, right? So that's how you do remediation. All right, so let's pull the lab out. Like I said, we'll be back here in just a minute to continue, but let's pull that out for a minute and move on. So all that's cool, and hopefully you can start to see the value of this, but how do you get started with this? How do you, if compliance settings is brand new to you, how do you kind of start to wrap your mind around the kind of checks that might be interesting in your environment? How do you start to see how some of these things are configured, right? Well, there's a tool. It's a solution accelerator. It's actually no longer being developed, but it's on the web, so you can download it, Security Compliance Manager. It's a great tool to be able to see some of these configurations that we as Microsoft build out for our different applications, operating systems, and so on. We have Office, IE, and the various server versions or operating system versions out there that we build these compliance settings for, right? And so you can use that as a starting point to just see what we think is important. Maybe it works in your environment, maybe it doesn't, maybe it stimulates thought, maybe it teaches you how to do it, whatever. It's definitely something worth taking a look at. So let me show you quickly how this works. So you can go to the web and you can download Security Compliance Manager. So I've got it here, went ahead and installed it. And if I go to the desktop and open it up, this is a standalone tool. It does not have to be on your configuration manager server, at least I don't think it does. I always put it there, so maybe I'm missing something. But it will list out all of the different settings that you have available or that we've pre-populated. So Exchange and IIS and all the operating systems and so on. So you can browse in here. So if you have Windows 2003, you want to just know what the settings are that we think are important for a DHCP server, as an example, then we'll read them out. All of these settings are important for us to look at, right? So we're looking for the security to make sure that the security of the DHCP server is according to best practices. This is what we consider the best practices, right? So you can look through, and all of these checks are important. That's why this is a great example of a compliance setting that is self-contained, but it has more than one setting. In fact, a lot more, right? Because it's important that all of these be true in order for this compliance setting to match best practices, right? And you can look through all of these: file system security. You can look at 2012, and you can see all of these different things, right? Now, again, standalone. But if you want to, maybe DNS server security, this is one that's of interest to you. You want to export it to ConfigMgr. It says 2007. This works just fine with 2012. Maybe you want to export it, look at what we have configured more specifically, maybe tweak it yourself. Certainly possible, right? You can export it. I've actually got 2 of these exported already, so I'll just use those, but that's how this console is useful. Whenever we export them, they come out as a CAD file. So I have print server security for 2012, and also file server security as CAD files. So if I go into configuration items and import these, then in fact I can just browse to them. Multi-select them, import both, and off we go. So I'll import them. You see it has both a configuration baseline for each and a configuration item for each. Click next. We go through the work, import them, and we're done. So if I want to go in here, very easy. I can just go to properties. This is the file server security. These are the things that we believe are important to look at whenever you're evaluating file server security. You'll find that most configuration baselines are registry value based. Certainly there's some that are WMI based and XML based and so on, but you get a sense really quick. You know, even if you never use this, you get a sense really quick what are some of the key areas that need to be evaluated for security. Right? The same is true for our other one, for print server security, have a lot of different items that we look at, all registry values. Again, you'll definitely see some non-registry values in there for other ones, but these all had registries. Anyway, hope it makes the point, right? And is a good illustration of having CIs that don't just have one setting, they have multiple settings on them so that you can check different things, okay? And then when I'm done, you know, you can copy these. You don't have to use ours as is. You can copy them, make tweaks to them, no problem. Keep the originals that you like. Once you're done with them and you want to get rid of ours, you can just delete them, no problem. Actually, it's going to make me delete the baselines first. Here are the baselines that we imported, by the way. So delete these, get them out of the environment, and then you can go back and delete the configuration items. And you're left then with just yours that you have in your environment, and off you go, right? So a great stage to learn not only how to use configuration items, to see how we do it, to see how we think settings should be configured in order for security to be in place, and so on. So let me pull that out. So now that we have all this set up, right, we know how to set it up, we're getting a flavor for how to set it up. How do we, what avenues do we have to actually tap into data, right? So there's 3 places, 2 really, that we get data from, and then a third that we can actually take action on that data. So Configuration Manager Client will show the results of evaluations. Report certainly will. And then we can actually build collections based on the results that we get from these configuration item evaluations. Let me show that to you real quick, all 3 of those. So let's pull this lab back in. Yeah. So this one is one that I've deployed already. So this, I'm just going to stay on the system because it's a client as well. So if I go to the control panel and look at the Configuration Manager client here, I'll see the configurations here, and you see 3 different configurations. One of them is compliant, one of them, the one that I deployed just for this, is non-compliant, and one of them is an error, right? So it's very possible that a baseline would come down and be an error for whatever reason. You can see here that it is, and then dig into what the problem is, right? But the point is, server admins can see this, right, if they want to, and see something that is non-compliant and even dig into it. So this one, let me remind you, has two settings on it. It has one that looks for the software hive and one that looks for the ABC hive. The ABC hive isn't here, the software hive is, therefore we expect this to be non-compliant. So I can view a report and find out what was actually non-compliant on it. So I know that my registry key baseline, detect registry key baseline, is non-compliant because this detect registry key is non-compliant. It's required, non-compliant, right? So if I look down here and I want to see, hey, what are the non-compliant rules? I see that in fact detect ABC is a non-compliant rule on that baseline, therefore the whole thing is non-compliant. There's also a software rule on there. You don't see it here because it's compliant, right? All right, so that's that. And then we also, I'm not going to spend tons of time on this, but we also have a full set of reports. So all of these compliance settings reports that will let you get into, drill into all the detail of your compliance baselines and so on. And then we do have the ability as well to build collections. Maybe you want to build a collection based on a system being out of compliance. We did that in ConfigMgr 2007 to facilitate remediation. We don't have auto remediation, but we certainly could build collections and then remediate those collections without a problem, right? And so we can do the same here. We don't need to do this for auto remediation of certain things, but if one of the items that you want to remediate, you can't through the automated mechanism, you might have a script or a task sequence or something you want to deploy to actually remediate that, and you could key off the collection. Either way, here's how you would do it, right? So again, my favorite word today seems like test. The limiting collection here, and then next, and then I'm going to add a query-based rule and edit the query statement. My criteria. So I'm going to specify two criteria here. One is going to be for the compliance configuration item compliance state. And the first thing I need to do is figure out what the configuration item ID is, CI unique ID. So I can choose that here. I can go look at the values here, and you'll see the full list of items that are available for me to choose. Now, I mentioned before, configuration items refers to a number of different things in the system. Could be applications, could be software updates, could be operating system-based stuff, could be configuration items in the compliance settings module, right? Here, you just have to know which one to pick. So let's just pick one, since I don't know right now which one to pick, and hit OK. So this is the first filter. So this collection will only pull in machines that have this particular configuration item, data about this configuration item on them, right? And then we can also do this. Oops. Configuration item compliance state here. And then for that specific configuration item, say compliance state name, right? Which is easier than the number. And then put again % here, so we get the values. Here are the three values. We're either compliant, error, or non-compliant. You saw all three of those on my system. So I can choose, okay, I want all the ones that are non-compliant, and so hit OK, and then run through the rest of this. And in fact, you would get a collection of all systems that have this baseline assigned and are also non-compliant, that you can then do whatever you want, right? It's dynamic, so as things come into compliance, this will fall out, and so on. All right. So I showed you the requirement that you know what the particular ID is. Well, it would be helpful to know how to map that. So if you go back to configuration items, you can add a column where you get the CI unique ID. If you scroll over, you will see what it is. So here, let me just expand this all the way. Scope ID, blah blah blah, These are actually operating system targeted CIs. Here's the unique numbers. So you would want to pair that up in the collection. So here's an interesting thing. You can actually key off of one specific CI. So your baseline may have 4 or 5 CIs on it, and for your collection, you want to hone in on just one particular CI and the results for that. You can do that because you know the ID. But configuration baselines are also CIs that you can select from that list. So if you want to choose the baseline that hosts 4 or 5 different CIs, you can do that too, right? And you'll notice that this uniquely has baseline in the name. So 3 baselines, I have 3 baselines. That's the correlation. All right. Okay, good enough. So let's pull this back out. So that's really what I wanted to go through today. Sets the stage. We're going to dig deeply in this as we go along. Again, the next session we'll talk about the various ways to configure all of the options for this, and then we'll start to go under the covers a bit to understand exactly how it works. So we'll wrap the session for today and see you next time.